science publications, according to the statistics compiled by the US National Science Foundation, which were published in January earlier this year. Reports on China as the new science and technology powerhouse have been proliferating since. While scientists in the West have to cope with unexpected crisis of confidence, with budget cuts, with rising demands for transparency, responsibility, and public outreach, Chinese scientists seem to receive unlimited governmental support to silently continue their frontier research. And while Western scholars of science or sociology continue to stress that academic freedom and advances in science are intrinsically linked, Chinese science is following a different path. Let's now move to the African continent. In other parts of the world, for example, on this continent, the seismic shifts might be less spectacular for the time being, but nonetheless remarkable. Diverse indicators such as R&D spending, number of research publications, number of scientists provide evidence that the continent's scientific renaissance is underway. Africa was for a long time either object or part of Western scientific endeavors, but hardly an actor in its own right. But I think we're all convinced who are here, the next Einsteins are everywhere, all over the globe. And I think it's more a matter of creating fertile environment for the scientists to strive. Africa now starts to make its own imprint on the global geography with homegrown returning talent or homegrown talent, with successful strategies, initiatives like this Next Einstein Forum, or the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in the Science in Africa, and last but not least, with renewed commitments by some of its political leaders, not only to spend more or any money at all on science, but also to develop their own science policy and funding strategies. And their own is, I mean, fit to the African continent, because I think it is necessary that every region finds their own things that fits them. Let's now briefly move to the Middle East, despite the fact that we have no representative from the Middle East here. It is a contrasting area where science has disappointed those who were hoping for a renaissance of Islamic science. Despite great, rather isolated successes like the opening of Sesame in Jordan in 2017, most regimes have reacted to the political turmoil of the recent years with prioritizing spending on security, defense, de-radicalization over that on R&D. Finally, a mapping of the new geography of science would be incomplete without at least mentioning countries like Brazil or India, although their rise, as we all know, have somewhat slowed down. And of course, rather recent powerhouses like South Korea or Japan. But let's turn to the panel now and start to collect their regional perspectives. I think we're very lucky that we have some of the most qualified people from 4 different continents to provide us with regional snapshots of the global current map of science, to discuss some of the causes, triggers, and driving forces for the rapidly changing landscape. And if you allow me, and in order to save time, I would like to very briefly introduce each one of you when I ask the first question to you, so one after the other after the questions. I will start with the representative from the hosting continent, Nelson, Professor Nelson Torto. You have been Executive Director of the African Academy of Science since August 2017. You are a renowned chemist with a PhD from Lund University in Sweden. You have taught at Rhodes University, and you have been the founding CEO of the Botswana Institute for Technology. When you took up your current position at the African Academy, you said, "The Academy is playing a significant role in promoting in development of science, technology, and innovation on the continent. I am dedicated to pushing this agenda forward to ensure science adequately plays its role to improve the lives of African people." Could you give us a little bit of insight of the measurements and the role the African Academy is currently playing or will play in the future to push this agenda forward?
Thank you very much, Ingrid. I should be careful what I say next time, because then you'll be asked about it in public. I think there are two sides to your question, really. Let me address the first part first. You know, the Academy has got three roles in terms of its mandate. I mean, the first thing is that we are looking into recognizing of excellence. The second aspect is that we are involved in advocacy and think tank type of activities with governments. And the third aspect is implementation of programs. And I think you have mentioned IESA, the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa. I think that is a very, very interesting and a unique platform for the African Academy of Sciences, because IESA was something that was formed between the African Academy of Sciences and NEPAD. And NEPAD obviously is linked to the African Union Commission. So it means that the activities of the African Academy of Sciences really are linked to what the African governments want to achieve. In terms of IESA really is Africa-focused, Africa-led, and Africa-specific. I won't say it's Africa-funded. But clearly, I mean, those aspects are very important in terms of the shift in terms of the thinking process. I think in the past, one would have expected a situation where you have an organization in the continent that just receives funds and basically implements whatever the funding has to do. But with IESA, the thinking has been different. We have tried to shift the center of gravity in terms of the initiation of the projects, in terms of the management of the projects. So the aim of IESA really was to, firstly, to identify the gaps that exist from an STI perspective, to try and see how we can build an STI environment and put the necessary capacity to try and facilitate innovation in the continent, and also, lastly, to find a way of identifying key people who can actually be able to address issues that are of concern to the continent. So using our IESA platform, we have really been able to penetrate the African continent in terms of our activities. We are active in about 46 African countries. We are funding several hundreds of researchers at different levels, at master's, at PhD, and at postdoctoral levels. So we've got postdoc programs, which I'm not going to run through because of the time limitation. But clearly, we are supporting researchers in thousands. So if you want to look at the measures that can reflect what we are doing. We are also involved in issues of creating the proper environment for research. So we have come up with a good financial grant practice standard that really would, in the future, facilitate and assist all those who are involved in research from a financial perspective in terms of management of finances. We are very conscious of the fact that you know, politicians or people in government, they don't read Lancet, they don't read Nature, but we want to find a way of being able to disseminate the research that is coming out from our activities. So we are going to be soon launching AS Online, where clearly we are going to have a platform where researchers in the continent can be able to share the outputs that are coming out of research. I think I've been told by my team that the good thing about the AS platform is that within 15 days, research can come from the lab to the public domain, where researchers can be able to share this knowledge, and I think we feel that is very, very critical. So in terms of going forward, I see that we're running out of time.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. So in terms of, so we are also involved in policy-related issues. I mean, we have recently published a documentation, Africa Beyond 2030, where clearly we are articulating some of the aspects that relate to the SDGs, because I think the SDGs are very, very important in terms of addressing some of the key issues. But from an innovation perspective, I think I want to just quickly talk about our Grand Challenges program. Okay, we have our Grand Challenges program where we feel that it is the best way to facilitate or initiate innovation within African governments. And this also is a program that really is driven by the respective governments in terms of being able to drive the key research issues. So in terms of the future, of course, which is the second part of the question, is that we are in continuous engagement with African governments to try and really make them realize that even though we set up ISA with all those initiatives that I told you about, we want to make sure that this program.
Very good news. Thank you very much. Let's move to the Asian continent now. Mr. Arai. Since February, you have been Director for Special Missions, Department of International Affairs in the Japan Science and Technology Agency. And in your previous life, before you did that, you entered the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in '82, and you have occupied various posts in various fields, including science and technology, multilateral economic relations, global environmental issues, and public relations and cultural exchange. What are the latest developments in Japan in terms of science, technology, and innovation? And how have they affected the scientific community as well as the society at large?
Okay, thank you, Ingrid. Good afternoon, bonjour, tout le monde. So I try to summarize or give you some Japanese situation very briefly. But before that, just one remark is that when I was in foreign service, I came to Rwanda several times, but 30 years ago. So it was in the 80s, and this is the first time since then. And I'm very impressed by the changes, recent progress made here in Rwanda, Kigali. And so in Japan, we have a basic act for science and technology enacted in 1995. With this, we have developed our ST policy. And more concretely, every 5 years, we have a science and technology basic plan. And the current one started in 2016 leading to 2020. And the key, yes, I can develop the contents, but it will take 1 hour or 2 hours. So just one key element, key concept is we are proposing is the society 5.0. What is 5.0? After hunting, agriculture, industrialization, and informatization. So we like to seek a hyper-smart society, combining highly the cyberspace and the physical space. It will be a human-centered society. So for that, with that in mind, we have implemented and developed our policy of ST. And we do not forget, of course, the international evolution on ST policy. So we have now a lot of a framework in international area to cope with targets. So Sendai, it's a Japanese city, Sendai framework for disaster risk management. This is also a program to 2020. And SDGs, of course. So it's a very global target setting. So we are very conscious of this evolution in the international community. And we have set a headquarters for the promotion of SDGs in Japan. And they have already set up implementation guiding principles and also action plan for the achievement of SDGs. In it, we put Society 5.0 to achieve SDGs together with this concept of Society 5.0. And also, we do not forget empowerment of next generation and women as main player for SDGs. But on top of that, for science diplomacy we are developing, we nominated one advisor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, advisor in science and technology. And his board already developed recommendations how we work for ST for SDGs. So ST for SDGs. They have a lot of recommendations, but they are also Society 5.0 linked with SDGs. Yes. And my agency now, Japan Science and Technology Agency, we have implemented or implementing many projects in those lines. And maybe later I can show you later and can explain. But our agency is a strategic research promotion agency. So with those national plan and also international targets in mind, we promote research programs. And just before ending, we have a lot of relation with African countries in the framework of TICAD, for example, and we'd like to consider more about how to strengthen our cooperation with African countries in ST.
Thank you very much, Arai. I wish we had more time because I have so many questions to you, but I think we should continue. It was the first round, and maybe then we still have enough time. Let's move to the American continent, to Rush Holt. Rush, you're an American scientist and politician, and as a member of the Democratic Party during your 2015, you were one of the 2 physicists there.
We reached 3 at one point.
Oh, very good. And during that time, you also worked as a professor of public policy physics. In 2015, you became the chief executive officer of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS, as we all know it, and the executive publisher of the Science family of journals. Rush, when you were having breakfast in a hotel in Berlin on a table next to me, so you also should watch out what you do when you sit on the table next to me, on November 9th in 2016, I very vividly remember the expression, the very serious expression on your face. And I read your serious face expression as a sign of professional, one of the key decision makers in the American scientific community. And of course, we all know what the date of November 9th in 2016 meant for the world. So which one has more impact on the leading position of American science and technology? Current US politics or a rapidly developing S&T in other parts of the world? And how are American decision makers dealing with these challenges?
Well, thank you, Ingrid. And first of all, I'm pleased to see so many people here interested in this. And I want to say that the Robert Bosch Foundation and Ames and Johnson & Johnson are doing something very important here. And we're pleased, AAAS is pleased to be associated with that. And what we're trying to do, I think all of us, is to try to understand what can be done to create the conditions under which the next Einsteins, plural, can thrive, can emerge and thrive. They are there. The question is, how do you create the conditions? What is the fertile ground? And I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of non-governmental organizations like AAAS and other science societies in creating and protecting the conditions where these next Einsteins can thrive. Now, AAAS is an international organization. We're a leader in the science and diplomacy area, but I did want to talk about the US a little bit, since that's what you ask about. That morning after the last national election in the United States, it seemed to me that science suffered a symbolic setback, but yet then it was only symbolic.
It's good to hear.
The United States has been historically a place where the conditions for science to thrive have been met. Robust public and private funding for a mix of discovery-based and applied research, a strong code of conduct for scientists, commitment to diverse perspectives and practitioners, transparency and communication, and discuss discordant findings. All of these are really necessary ingredients for science to thrive. And they have been found in the United States traditionally. I mean, you know, in the early days, you had the von Humboldts and the Edisons and the James Clerk Maxwells who followed their own path. If they had resources, they would do the science. Then in the United States, we incorporated and really perfected the graduate research structure. We took it from Germany and developed it in a way that for a century worked very well. Science thrived in the United States. We became a magnet for researchers from around the world. Many people know that the United States has a large number of Nobel Prizes, for example. But what most people don't realize is that 40% of the Nobel Prizes awarded to Americans in chemistry and medicine and physics since the turn of the century were awarded to immigrants who came to the United States not to become Americans so much as to be able to do their science in the best possible way. And so that climate still exists for the most part. A lot of people think, oh, things are terrible for science in the United States. Why, only last week, the federal government approved $177 billion in research and development funding for federal spending, which is up 13%. Has signed that into law. Some of the conditions still exist, but current changes in the United States and elsewhere on immigration policy, on really more and more public decisions being made on the basis of ideology or opinion rather than evidence, threaten science. It threatens the value that society places on science. And so even though most Americans would say they value science, they don't really appreciate how it works and what is necessary for it to thrive. So the impediments to good science are growing even while the practice of science is thriving. And it's my fear that these impediments will be greater than the relentless, persistent drive of scientists, and will begin to overcome that, that these conditions will not be maintained. Our president, for example, has not been publicly advocating for science. I cannot think of a single time since he has been in office that he has publicly advocated for science the way President Tschol, President Kagame did repeatedly yesterday. So I think it is troubling. But the scientists are relentless and persistent. They have the drive. You know, worldwide, starting in the United States last year, there was a large March for Science. 1 million people worldwide saying, we want to defend the conditions where science can thrive. So the question is, will this drive of the scientists be able to overcome the impediments of ideology, of restricted freedom of speech that is starting to grow?
So I'm very sad to hear that your serious expression on your face was somewhat justified.
Let's say it was only a recognition of a symbolic change.
Okay. Let's see whether we have time to come back to these things later. Let me now go back, and I would like to Minister Bauer, you have been Minister of Science, Research and the Arts in Baden-Württemberg since 2011. I think everybody on the audience knows you, so I just very briefly say that your background is political sciences, political economics in German, and you're a member of the Green Party in Germany. Minister Bauer, in one of the official documents of Baden-Württemberg, I found one major statement for the basis of the prosperity, the quality of life, and readiness for the future that characterizes Germany's southwest. and that this is all based on its global reputation for outstanding research. What are the key ingredients in science and economics for the success of our country, or Land, I would say, Baden-Württemberg?
Thank you very much for this question. I would start, I call home. Baden-Württemberg, you mentioned it, is one of 16 states within Germany, located in the southwest of Germany, bordering France and Switzerland. And so I think we're a state poor in natural resources, and perhaps this is something we make it up for with beautiful natural landscapes and forests and hills and such places known as, for example, Black Forest and Lake Constance. But in the end, the greatest resource of our state is our people. And we trust in the ability of our people, and we do this for a long time, because we started more or less 100 years ago as an agricultural country, because poor of resources, I mentioned it. And how did we take a state with a population of 11 million and a size more or less comparable to Belgium? How did we take a state from an agricultural region into a scientific center and one of the most innovative regions of Europe? We invest almost 5% of our GDP into research and development. That's one of the highest rate within the whole of the Europe, and it's one of the highest rates anywhere in the world. And I think it's important to mention that this is not only due to the activity of the public sector. A large amount is provided by the private sector, by our businesses and our companies, because they themselves dedicate a lot of energy into research and development. And I think perhaps that's a very important factor to explain the history and the development of our state, which is our 11 million of people is distributed and spread out across the whole country, like are our businesses too, and our small and medium-sized cities too. Spread out across the country, our cities have most of them have more or less 200,000 residents or less. And in every place of our country there are these small cities with universities and with important companies, some of them well known, like Bosch, or like Mercedes-Daimler, or like SAP, and they are spread out across the whole country like our cities and our universities. And I think this kind of, I name it, shared excellence is the basis of our development as an innovative country. And nowadays we are a strong European economic power based on innovation with high-tech companies. I mentioned some of them. And I'm convinced the way of success is the kind of collaboration between these elements of communities, regions, universities, and the businesses and companies themselves. This creates the ecosystem, the basis for a good development of excellent research. And I think it's important, if we look at the development of good science and research results, to know that this has to grow bottom up by this kind of strong and systematically collaboration. So you asked about the key ingredients for a success story. I think, to make a long story short, prioritize education and science and do it for a long time, because education and science need a long time to develop. And the second point is give trust to your scientists, to your researchers, give them trust through funding, basic funding for their development, and also give them the freedom to do what they think that they have to do. and to decide about their issues, their field of research, give them the trust that they can define and do risky research or blue sky research, that they can teach the young students in risky thinking. All this is the basis for excellent science. And this is the third point. We have to seek for excellence, and we have to do it on an international level, because science is global. So, but the basis has to be put if you afterwards want to grow and to have excellent results internationally. And the last point, I mentioned it, I think it's very important to have this kind of collaboration in many points and spread out over the whole country to let it grow. The diversity of ideas, of different perspectives, of communication between academia and companies, between different disciplines, between the communities and academia, and vice versa. I think we need this ecosystem of collaboration to be strong in science and research. A last point of this collaboration growing very well in Germany is the close collaboration between business and science. Education system, because our vocational training or our dual study programs are something I think very special in the world, and they create a basis of confidence and of mutual knowledge that is crucial for our success story. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think it was a good thing that I had you first and then Professor Strohschneider second, because that's a wonderful starting line for him. Professor Strohschneider is the current president of the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, or the German Research Foundation. It is the self-governing organization for sciences and humanities, which promotes research in the universities and other publicly funded research institutes in Germany. Your background is German philology, as well as law, history, sociology, and political sciences. Mr. Strohschneider, shaping the digital transformation is a key factor for a healthy research system. I have learned that the German Research Foundation is about to appoint a commission of experts on this topic. Could you elaborate on the benefits and challenges of digitalization in the research system, and maybe also build on a few points that Frau Bauer said, if that's not being asking too much in 5 minutes?
Thank you very much. I totally agree that the most important prerequisite of good science is societal trust in science, and that is an issue for different reasons, and probably I got the opportunity to come back to that with 2 sentences. But the first point would be that remapping global science has to take and accelerating process of digitization of everything in the world, and that is the reason why we're thinking about what does it mean not only for research, but what does it mean also for research funding and institutionalization processes and so forth. And let me start with saying that I'm very convinced that the utopic perspectives of digitization, as unreliable as the dystopic perspectives of the digitization process. What is the only certain thing is, what is certain only is the future is uncertain. Even the future of digitization is uncertain. So we have to wrestle with the questions arising, and those questions have to do, of course, with the beneficial aspects of digitization. Through digitality, research is being transformed in very different ways, new opportunities, new methodologies, new forms of gaining insight occur and drive the process of science. Data-intensive technologies completely reformat processes of the scientific endeavor in various disciplines, in all disciplines, so to say. So the transformation of research through digitization, or the digital as I coin it, is beneficial for many epistemic endeavors. However, it comes at a cost. The digital is, in many respects, replacing, supplementing traditional methodologies and also traditional forms of knowledge. And we do not know what the losses of these traditional forms of methodologies and knowledge will cause for the orders of knowledge we live in. From my perspective as the president of a funding organization, I conceive, or I envision a change of the even a change of the concept of what science is. Imagine, what is the notion of research? What is knowledge? What is a scientific argument? What is a proof? What is evidence? As soon as the lines between correlation and causality, algorithms, what is a proof, an argument, what is knowledge, as soon as a digital simulation replaces an experiment, as soon as the research result is owed to an algorithm, to a deep learning algorithm, which is not to be transformed into an argument. What is the status of knowledge then in this digital process? And if you envision questions or challenges like this, you once in a moment come to asking questions on how to administer research science, how to make research and science politics, because if science is changed in this way, then the question arises, what is the researcher's achievement? Who is reliable for a scientific outcome which rests on an algorithm? Who is liable for its consequences? Who is the one to have the reputation? Who is the one to have attributed scientific knowledge then? All this will change, and all this will change the settings, the institutional settings, the decision-making processes, the funding processes, because all these processes rest on very stable convictions on what an argument is, what quality is, what a scientific outcome is. Well, this is at least not an answer to your question, but it's a sort of elaboration on what your question is about.
Back to that. Thank you for 4 snapshots from the regional perspective and 1 snapshot of the future, of the global future of science. Let's now, I think specifically the last issue addressed by Professor Strohschneider demonstrates that we experience an ever-growing importance of globalized science, of thinking about all these things, which I think there are many committees around the world that deal with questions that you just asked, that we experience a form of cooperation that does have the roots in the nation states, but evolves in some kind of a transnational space and follows its own logic. That is why I suggest that in the second part, we concentrate on 2 strategic challenges that arise from this new situation. I will ask the whole panel the 2 following questions, and I think you can just answer from your perspective, but with a global perspective and not so much your regional or national perspective. How can we make sure that globalized science continues to prosper and that people and knowledge flow as freely as possible, even in a world full of political turmoil, sanctions, and censorship? How can we also make sure that research results are used for the benefit of humanity to address the grand challenges? Okay, so who would like to reply to that first? Rush, you already hold your microphone in the hand.
Yes,
so
I do. As I said at the beginning, I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of non-governmental organizations like AAAS. Each scientist does her work someplace. And so the world climate certainly counts for something, but the local climate counts for a lot. And I think it's important everywhere that scientists ally themselves with organizations like AAAS, because AAAS not only has programs, well, it has, first of all, it has a mission to advance science for the benefit of all people. So we are there to monitor and advocate for the conditions that science needs to thrive in each locality and then cooperatively. As we ask ourselves at this meeting, you know, how do we find the next Einsteins? It's probably worth looking back at the first Einstein. What did he do? He asked questions more persistently than anyone previously had done. You know, when he was a teenager, he asked, what would I look like in a mirror if I was holding the mirror and running at the speed of light?
But
now,
still his grant got turned down.
And he thought about that question from every angle so persistently. And now remember, he went from Germany to Switzerland, back to Germany, ultimately to the United States to find the climate, the intellectual, the scientific climate he was looking for, so that he could, he always had the confidence to keep asking the question. We have to give young Einsteins the confidence, the kind of confidence that Einstein himself had. But he was looking for the freedom to pursue his ideas. And he would have been the first to say that political, academic, and scientific freedom are not separable, that you must have that. So you want to give them, the young scientists, the confidence. You also want to give them the freedom, and you want to give them the support to keep at that. And you have to have organizations that are monitoring the situation and continuing to speak out and advocate. So, you know, it's in each of these locations, the young scientists and those who want them to succeed have to insist that science is not a luxury. It's not a luxury that the, you know, choose your African country of choice, whichever one it is, that science is not a luxury that comes after security, after agriculture, after health, but it is the road to achieve what you want in security, in agriculture, and in health. And that it is not something that scientists do, but it's a frame of mind that pervades the whole society. That the idea is to empower all to think like scientists, so that they will be answering questions based on evidence. So what is what's the best way to raise my crops? What's the best way to run my company? What's the best way to educate myself or my children? You may not think that those are scientific questions, but they are. You're asking, what is the evidence that we can find to answer those questions? And that should pervade the society, and it will make it possible then for the professional young scientists to do their work.
I think you're very much describing the DNA of the next Einstein Forum, and I would like to have this text because you say it in much nicer words than we were able to say that, and maybe we can exchange it later. I saw you nodding with your head, Peter.
I would like to stress two things. First, Einstein grew up in Baden-Württemberg.
The first year of his life.
This has to be said.
Decisive.
As I did.
You did, of course.
The second point, I would like to stress what Rush said, namely that academic freedom, scientific freedom, political freedom, and societal freedom are strongly connected to each other. This is the quadrum within trust in science can only grow. Trust is not at hand. Trust has to be reproduced on a daily basis within the science system and the academic system and within society at large. And the trust in science is under pressure. In different countries, and in different means, as, to put it bluntly, autocratic and national populist movements on the rise throughout different and very developed, even very developed scientific and academic countries, bringing freedom of research under pressure, changing what truth ought to be or what evidence ought to be. I mean, notions like fake news or alternative facts, they cause a substantial political shift. They connect truth not with an objective outside world. They connect truth to power. And that is a very different thing. And it's practically happening in the public discourses in the US, in Austria, in Germany, in Poland, in India, in China, and in many other countries throughout. Is that the science and research system is not only under pressure from the outside, it is also under pressure from its internal procedures.
Yes.
The reproducibility
so.
crisis, the economy of the publication system, the quantification of everything, the economy of the publication system, which causes for fraud, for false claims of authorship, and all that stuff is one of those points which, observed from the outside, from the society, make it a plausible cause to express distrust into science. And the other thing is that we have a culture of, a culture of exaggerated promises of science. We promise more than we can meet in due process. We like to stress the knowledge of science. We do not stress the limitations of our knowledge. We do not stress the skepticism, the status of our knowledge. We do not stress the ambivalences of scientific and technological knowledges. And this is observed by the society at large and causes distrust into science. So what I want to say is it's two developments, evolvements throughout the world which cause for a risky situation for the science and academic system in very different countries and in very differentiated political and societal and economical situations. And we have to wrestle with that.
Thank you very much. Nelson, I think I would like to move to the African continent and hear your perspective on all these.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I want to agree with the previous speakers. I've got a sense that we are thinking along the same lines. I think the principle is that we need good people. We need good people all over the place. We need good researchers. We need good politicians. We need good citizens for us to be able to have an objective way of doing things, so to speak, you know, like what we have said. But I think what I wanted to just bring to your attention is that I think from an African perspective, I think one has to be a bit more responsible. You know, my assessment is that sometimes research, sometimes the value of research is not determined by what it delivers, but sometimes it's determined by where one finds the research, so where one publishes the research. So sometimes that makes it very important. Yeah. And obviously, I think one of the things that, the gap that I feel that has to be narrowed is the gap between the researcher and the beneficiary of the research. From an African content, I feel that there's a way in which that gap has been too wide, so to speak, you know, that the relationship between the funder and the researcher has been very intimate and very close. But it has negated the people that are supposed to benefit. So in a way, I think, you know, unlike in the US, unlike in Europe, where maybe, you know, there are a lot of players in terms of generating knowledge that can actually have an impact on the society. I think from the African continent perspective, it's probably sometimes the little money that comes through the donors that could actually make a difference. So one would want to see a situation where I think we have a better listening to what is on the ground. Goodness of the people that are doing research, and I think for me that is quite critical from an African perspective. And of course, like what I said earlier on, that I mean, from an AS perspective, I think we feel that a dissemination platform is very, very critical. And I've been telling people that, I mean, last year I was invited to give a plenary talk because I've been out of the academia for a while now. I couldn't find my papers. I couldn't have access to them. So you publish and then it disappears. So it means that if you are in the continent and you are not at an institute that subscribes to the Lancet and all the other journals, once you have signed off the copyrights, everything is gone. So it means that, in a way, the poor African researchers, are investing for the North, simply because you lose your information as soon as you've generated it. So I think the issue of dissemination and actually being able to have access to knowledge, whether it's work done in the US, whether it's work done in Europe, whether it's work done here, we know from the recent Ebola crisis that, you wouldn't have wanted to have historical information coming from the journals. You want things that happened last week in the lab to be discussed by the researchers so that they can progress the issue. So I think the issue of sharing the knowledge that is generated and the issue of listening to the stakeholder, I think for me it's quite critical globally, so to speak.
Okay. So maybe it's an opportunity for Africa to do the leapfrogging, because it's all about excellent system of how to identify the brightest minds and the best research proposals. And maybe, and I think this is an excellent platform for this, maybe one can just leapfrog and not go through the traditional ways of setting up all these strategies, but just join into this international, and I'm sure you have already done that. I know that you wanted to say something. Mm-hmm.
Sure. The problem of the unvisibility of scientists and their results has different facets. The problem, perhaps the American or European model is the problem with professor, nobody's reading you. We face it too because of the amount of papers published and the disability to recognize this and to organize a generalized debate on the level of science knowledge that's in the world. But I wanted to talk about the aspect of freedom and freedom of science under pressure. If you remember the debate on Brexit in the UK, we heard politicians, they were successful when they talked about science and who cares about experts? And the scientists were really preoccupied about Brexit, but it wasn't, they were not only ignored, but it was an instrument to go against science, to be successful as a politician. So the anti-scientist movement and emotion is something like an anti-elitist movement that's not only proper to authoritarian systems, but it's within Europe and United States also. So this crisis of trust is a crisis, I think, against every kind of globalization. It's a kind of distance to our globalized economy and also our globalized science system. So we have to think about how to regain trust. And it's not enough to defend freedom of science. We have to talk about responsibility and our opportunities and our responsibility to regain trust. And I think it's very important to do more to explain science and to create bridges for the public to understand the application opportunities of science. It's an extra work. It's not only writing papers and publishing papers. That's a lot of work, but we have to do more. We have to explain and we have to convince the public about the the evidence and the importance of the scientific results. So I think if our governments have to provide funding, they need the public trust, because if not, they can't provide funding, because nobody will understand with the amount of priorities we have if we give more money to science. So science themselves and scientists themselves have to support the translation of the importance of scientific results.
I will ask you last, Tatsuo, but I can again read Rush's face. He immediately wants to say something to this.
Yes.
Very short, please, because I promised you to be on time and end on time.
Thank you, Minister. Of course, scientists, we have ourselves to blame to some extent for the rejection of expertise, because we have made it too easy for people to think that science is the result of the process rather than the process itself. And so those results are somehow presented as fixed and definite and final. And of course they aren't. Every scientist knows that. And so we have to do a better job of educating science. At AAAS, again, we have workshops and courses on science communication. We have the mass media fellowships for graduate scientists to work in media outlets for a period of time. We have the International Science Journalism Awards and so forth. And then, of course, our publications. And Science Magazine is an important and I think great scientific publication because it is mission-based. It exists as part of our mission to advance science for the benefit of all people, not to make a profit. And so we make it available to you know, the scientific articles to low and middle income countries. We make it possible for those who publish to take their manuscripts and put them on PubMed Central or post them on their own repository, on their own websites and so forth. This communication of the essence of the research is so important. It's why for many articles each week in Science Magazine, we write them up in an understandable way to make it possible for the ideas to get out, as you say they need to. So, well, enough.
Okay.
Enough. Thank you. Yes.
Tatsuo, would you like
Yes.
to react to all of this?
Yes. I agree totally with the previous speakers, and in my way, I like to summarize maybe how the science, and which contribute to the society. One is our common target setting. 2 is implementing structure. 3 is human development. And the first is common target setting, because we have to know where we are going to. And already there are sustainable development goals, Paris Agreement, and Sendai Framework. We have that. But with the strong, we need together of these targets, we need to recognize the role of STI, not by scientists, but by all the communities. We need to underline STI plays key role to solve those challenges. This is the first one. The second one is implementing structure international and international scale. So there are many frameworks, NEF also, so to stimulate communication and cooperation among the scientists. But in there, I think it's necessary to have one thing in mind, cross the borders. We need to cross the borders in several ways. So between disciplines, so the targets are so complicated and so correlated, we have to work together. Science from engineers, social science, and others. And also cross the border of social society. So not just scientists, policymakers and NGOs and others. And then cross the borders of geographic borders, like country borders. So like here, we are here to promote international cooperation. And finally, the third one is human development. So for that, for all of us of the world to participate in this process, we have to develop human resources everywhere. Of course, in Africa, I see good example here already going on. So with those ideas in mind, Japan, yes, we are promoting and advancing necessary measures.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're already running over time, so I would like to ask the panel, those who would like to react, in 2 or 3 sentences, and I think crossing the borders geographically or other borders was a very good keyword. What is most important from your perspective? Who would like to say a final word to that? And it could be 3 or 4 or everybody, but please be very short. Nelson, you would like to start?
He put me under pressure.
Okay, that's not what we want.
It's fine. No, I think for me, let me just say that, given the events of the past couple of days, I really have got a positive expectation in terms of what science can do for Africa. I think there's a great potential, and and I think it's an issue of supporting the young ones who really have shown a lot of enthusiasm and positivity. And from that, I think some of the challenges that Africa faces will somewhat be addressed. And of course, I know that on Sunday you said that impact is a promise of a promise of a promise. But I think one cannot guarantee that there will be impact in the science that is being done. But let's hope that we can generate knowledge that will be of use in the future if it's not now.
Thank you. Somebody? Rush?
If you
2
want
sentences, because I promised you to
foster,
be on time.
If you want to foster the growth of young scientists, the goal should be not just to look after their welfare, but to see that they are immersed in a society that is empirically based, that values evidence and values scientific thinking. Then.
Thank you. Nobody else? You want to say? One last sentence is 2?
One sentence. And this needs institutional settings. What science and higher education policies and research policies can do is not research. It's only building enabling structures. Never forget that. We do not science. We do enabling structures.
Tatsuo, and then Bauer.
Just one remark. So human development for ST is very important, and I'm very glad to be here because I thought I would be one of the few people who has the title of ambassador. But here I found many young ambassadors, so it's very promising for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Frau Bauer.
I'll talk as a politician, and in my final words, our world is full of global challenges, and we know that we can face them only if we work together. We need the support of science in an international perspective to face these global challenges, and so I think it would be great if we define mutually our common targets, to have the active help and support from our scientists, for example, in fighting the climate change. There's no much time to lose. We need the support of science for this common target, or to create a emission-free mobility worldwide. We need the support of science urgently, and I'm sure if the active part in support of science is seen by the public, trust will increase into the global scientific system.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we could continue discussing forever because we have touched so many individual topics, but at least I think we have achieved one of the goals that I announced in the beginning. We increased a little bit of the awareness of why it is important that we should care about the shifts in the global map of science. Let me thank all the participants of the audience, of the panel. By
we speak the same language.
We all speak the same language. Because you all speak the same language.